Vienna, 1907. Just as the imperial waltz echoed through Hofburg's marble halls and the gas lamps along the palace gardens flickered to life beneath the spring dusk, Celandine Lovell stood alone in the shadow of a stone archway, her gloved fingers curled tight around a silver fan she hadn't opened all evening. She hadn't been invited to dance. Again, the other daughters of barons and counts passed her with silk hems swishing and diamonds catching the light, but none met her eyes. Forgotten, like always. Her family had once mattered before her father's disgrace, before the court had quietly turned its back. Now, she was just a name on a list, present but unseen. A violin paused. Applause fluttered. She turned toward the garden, where the music drifted softer beneath the night air. If she stayed, she'd only watch the other girls whirl past again, chosen and bright. If she left, no one would notice. She stepped into the darkened garden. The hedges were still clipped into sharp lines, the gravel paths swept clean. But the garden felt private, like something the court had forgotten. Beyond the rose arbor, a marble fountain murmured softly. She paused there, brushing her hand over a blooming iris, when a low voice startled her. "You shouldn't be out here alone." She spun. A man stood just past the edge of light, beside the shadowed arch of a yew tree. He wore no court sash, no medals, just a black evening coat and gloves. His face wasn't familiar, no powdered wig, no polished accent. He looked Viennese, but his bearing was wrong. Too still, too aware. "And you should," she said, lifting her chin. He stepped forward, and moonlight caught the curve of his cheekbone. "I'm not here by invitation." "Then we have that in common." His mouth twitched, not in amusement, exactly, but something like surprise. "Celandine Lovell," he said quietly. "Daughter of Baron Avery Lovell, former envoy to Constantinople, disgraced in the Eastern trade scandal of 1899. Her breath caught. "How do you know that?" "I know things." He paused. "It's my job." She narrowed her eyes. "Are you a policeman?" "No." "Then what are you?" The man glanced toward the palace, then back to her. "A spy," he said. "For the emperor." She laughed once. "That's a poor joke." "I don't joke." He stepped closer. She should have moved, should have walked away, called a guard, anything. But something in his eyes held her. Not danger, not desire, just a kind of quiet watchfulness, like he saw her in a way no one had in years. "What's your name?" she asked. "Ziven Sterling." No title, no honorific, just a name, plain as a soldier's. She looked at his gloves, dark leather, worn at the edges. "I should go," she said, turning slightly. "Wait." She paused. "I wasn't sent for you," Ziven said. "But you're not safe here, not tonight. The Russian ambassador's son has been drinking since noon. He's still angry about your father's testimony. He talked about revenge." Celandine felt the cold slide down her spine. "How do you know all this?" Ziven tilted his head. "Because I listened." She hesitated. "Are you here to protect me?" "No. I'm here to stop a duel at dawn." She blinked. "Whose duel?" "Yours." He handed her a folded letter. Her name was written in a jagged, unfamiliar hand. She opened it. The words inside were sharp and furious accusations against her father, demands for honor, a challenge signed by Nikita Antonov, son of the Russian ambassador. "This is madness," she whispered. "I'm a woman, and he's drunk enough not to care." Ziven took the letter back, tucked it into his coat. "You need to leave Vienna. Tonight. I can't just disappear. I have no money, no family." "I'm not suggesting you run," he said. "I'm offering to help." "Why?" He didn't answer at first. Then, "Because you were never meant to be forgotten." A door opened behind them. Voices spilled out laughter, glass clinking. Ziven stepped back into shadow. "Meet me at the back gate. Midnight. We're walking boots." She hesitated. "You're serious?" "I always am." Then he was gone. Celandine stood there for a long moment, the letters echo still in her hand. She returned to the ballroom. No one noticed. Her mother was already gone, her old chaperone half asleep against the wall. The music started again, a Strauss waltz this time. She watched the dancers spin, her heart pounding like a drum. At 5 minutes past midnight, Celandine stepped into the garden again. This time, she wore a dark cloak and sturdy boots beneath her gown. Her gloves were wool, not lace. Her hair was pinned tight. Ziven waited by the gate, just as he'd said. A plain horse-drawn cart stood nearby, the kind used by servants. "You came," he said. "You told me I'd be dead by morning." He lifted the gate latch. Then let's make sure you're not. They climbed into the cart. The driver, a silent man with a cap pulled low, cracked the reins, and they rolled into the cobbled streets. Where are we going? She asked. To someone who can help you disappear without vanishing. That makes no sense. It will. They rode in silence for a while, the gas lamps flickering past. Vienna looked different from the edge of a cart. The grandeur faded. The alleys grew tighter. The buildings leaned in close. They stopped at a shuttered shop with no sign. Ziven led her through the back, past shelves of books and ink pots, into a small room where a woman with gray braids sat at a writing desk. This is Magda, Ziven said. She forges papers. I don't need forged papers, Celandine said. You will, if you want to stay alive. Magda looked up. You're the Lovell girl. Celandine stared. How do you? Ziven talks, Magda said. More than he thinks. Ziven looked away. Magda opened a drawer and pulled out a sheaf of blank passports. British. Or Hungarian. British, Celandine said faintly. Ziven nodded. You'll leave Vienna tomorrow. By train. You'll be listed as Clara Linton, governess to the children of a British consul in Trieste. Celandine's voice trembled. You've done this before. Yes. For others. For people who mattered to someone. She looked at him. Do I matter to you? He didn't answer, but his hand brushed hers as he passed her the papers. Just a touch. Gloved. Brief. Enough. They left the shop just before dawn. The city was quiet, the sky pale with morning. At the station, Celandine clutched the papers, her heart heavy. This is goodbye, she asked. Ziven shook his head. I'll meet you in Trieste. In 1 week. But I'm not letting you vanish alone. She stared at him, her throat tight. Why are you doing this? He looked at her then, really looked. Because when I watched you in the garden, I saw someone who still believed her story wasn't over. She stepped forward, her voice unsteady. And if I want you to be part of it. Ziven smiled just once. Then I'll be there. The train pulled in, steam hissing. She boarded. Turned once. He was still there. Celandine Lovell, forgotten noblewoman, daughter of scandal, pressed her hand to the window as the train pulled away. And Ziven Sterling, royal spy, watched her go with a promise in his eyes. Not the end. Not yet. The train swayed gently as it carved through the Styrian Alps. Celandine sat beside the window, her hands folded over a leather valise worn thin at the corners, borrowed from Magda, who had also given her a plain navy traveling dress and a hat with no trim. Her reflection in the glass was almost unrecognizable. No pearls, no embroidery, no sign of the girl once trained to curtsy before archduchesses. The train pulled into Graz by mid-morning, pausing only long enough for a change of crew. She remained still, eyes on the distant ridgelines. Snow lingered in the crevices, though the valleys below had already turned green. She hadn't eaten since the evening before, but the idea of food made her stomach tighten. When the conductor passed again, she handed him her forged documents. He barely glanced at them before tipping his cap. Trieste by morning, Fräulein. She nodded, her voice caught behind a wall of nerves and questions. The hours passed in a hush, only the occasional cry of a child or the clatter of the wheels against the tracks breaking the silence. Toward late afternoon, a woman boarded at Selge, middle-aged, with copper-colored hair and a reticule bursting with sewing. She sat across from Celandine and offered a polite smile before taking up her embroidery hoop. You're heading south? The woman asked, needle flashing through linen. Yes. For work, I expect. You've the look of a governess. Celandine forced herself to meet the woman's gaze. That's right. The woman's eyes softened. Then you'll do well. The English are particular, but not unkind. I hope so. They spoke no more. As the light outside dimmed, the woman dozed off, and Celandine quietly opened the compartment window a few inches. The air smelled of damp earth and wood smoke. Her mind drifted to the garden and the man who had stood in its shadows. She remembered the way he had said, I'll be there, with no flourish or promise, just certainty. She had no reason to believe in such things. And yet, she did. By the time the train chugged into the Trieste station, dawn was only a suggestion on the horizon. Celandine stepped off with her valise clutched in both hands, her boots stiff after the long ride. The platform bustled with dockworkers and porters, the smell of salt and coal thick in the air. She moved slowly, scanning the crowd. He was not there. She waited beside a stack of crates, her back to the wall, the hem of her skirt brushing against fish scales discarded on the stones. 1/4 hour passed, then another. A group of sailors passed, laughing in Italian. A boy offered to carry her bag, but she shook her head. The street lamps flickered out one by one as daylight crept in. Then, just as the morning bells began to ring from the church by the harbor, she saw him. Ziven walked without urgency, but his eyes were searching. When he saw her, something in his posture eased. He wore a loose greatcoat, collar turned up, and a soft traveling hat that shadowed most of his face. "You made it," he said. "You're late," she answered, though her voice betrayed her relief. There was a delay on the border. Hungarian customs officers. They opened every trunk on the carriage behind mine. He glanced toward the port side. "There's a boarding house. Clean, discreet. I've arranged for a room. For me. For both of us. But on separate floors." He led her through the narrow streets, past shuttered cafes and laundry strung between upper windows. The boarding house stood at the edge of the Jewish quarter, pale stucco with dark green shutters, and a wooden sign carved with a lion and a harp. Inside, the landlady, a tall woman with a mole on her chin, handed Celandine a key and gestured up the stairs without comment. The room was small but tidy, with a narrow bed, a basin, and a window overlooking the alley. She placed her valise on the chair and sat beside it, listening to the faint creak of floorboards above. Later that morning, he knocked once. She opened the door. "There's someone I want you to meet," he said. "But you'll need to dress plainly. I've no other clothes." He handed her a parcel wrapped in brown paper. "Now you do." Inside was a simple gray skirt and a white blouse, no corset required. She dressed quickly, pinned her hair back, and followed him into the bright, salt-laced air. The streets grew wider as they moved east, toward the hills above the port. They stopped at a villa with iron gates and ivy climbing the outer wall. Ziven rang twice. A servant opened the door without a word and led them through a sunlit corridor into a room filled with books and large maps pinned to the walls. A man in his 50s stood at the desk, sleeves rolled, spectacles perched on his nose. "Celandine Lovell," Ziven said. "This is her Dr. Elias Weiss, former attaché to the Imperial Ministry of Foreign Affairs." Weiss looked up. "So you're the girl with the target on her back." Celandine stiffened. "I didn't ask for it. No one does." He gestured to a chair. "Sit." She did. Ziven remained standing, arms crossed loosely. Weiss studied her. "Your father's testimony cost the Russians a lucrative oil contract. They haven't forgotten. I was a child when it happened. To them, you're a symbol. Symbols are harder to erase than people." She stared at the map behind him, showing the Balkans in faded ink. "I don't want to spend the rest of my life hiding," she said. "That may not be necessary," Weiss replied. "There's a consular posting in Alexandria. The British consul is hiring a governess for his niece. If you take the position, you'll be under British protection. I don't speak Arabic." "You won't need to." Ziven said nothing. Celandine turned to him. "And what would you do? Return to Vienna?" "No," he met her gaze. "I'll accompany you. As a shipping clerk for the Austrian Lloyd Company." "Is that real?" "It will be." Weiss handed her an envelope. "Your name is Clara Linton. You were born in Sussex. Your mother was a music teacher. Your father died at sea." She took the papers. "And if they find me?" "You won't be alone," Ziven said. She looked at him. "Why do you keep helping me?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because I don't want you to disappear." She folded the envelope and tucked it into her satchel. "Then let's make sure I don't." They left the villa in silence. The wind had changed, carrying the scent of distant rain. At the edge of the quay, Ziven paused. "There's a ship tomorrow. The Colossal. We'll board at dawn. And tonight." "Tonight, you rest. Nothing will happen while I'm near." She nodded once, then turned toward the narrow streets that led back to the boarding house. Behind her, Ziven lingered by the water. Neither of them said it aloud, but something had shifted. Not yet love, not quite. But the soil had softened where it once was stone. And in the hush between arrival and departure, something fragile had begun to take root. The sky over the Adriatic had already begun to pale when Celandine stepped onto the deck of the Colossal. The air was thick with brine and cold dust, and the faint shuffle of sailors stowing rope echoed between the masts. She wore the gray linen dress from Trieste, buttoned high at the collar, a shawl wrapped tightly at her shoulders. Her eyes scanned the crowd not out of fear, but out of habit. She had learned quickly what it meant to be watched. Ziven stood near the railing, speaking quietly to a man in a wool cap with an ink-stained ledger. When he caught her eye, he gave a brief nod, then turned back to the man, gesturing toward the crates marked with the Lloyd Company seal. A clerk, just as he had said. No badge, no pistol, no insignia. He looked like he belonged. Once the ship pulled away from the port, the docks slipping into shadow, Celandine remained by the stern, her gloved hands gripping the iron rail. The sea was calm, save for the churn of the propellers below. She didn't speak until the coastline was no longer visible. I thought, she said quietly, that I'd feel something more. Relief or grief. But I feel only blank. Ziven appeared beside her, not too close. Sometimes the body knows it's not yet time to feel. Will it come later? He watched the foam trail behind them. It always does. They stood in silence, the kind that didn't strain. The morning light caught in his hair, brown threaded with copper, and she noticed for the first time the faint crease beside his temple. She wondered how long he had lived this way, always watching, never speaking more than needed. I have no skills, she said, not turning toward him. Not the kind that matter now. You read Greek. How would you know that? You corrected the spelling on a book title in Magda's shop. The label was wrong. She breathed out once, surprised. It was just a glance. You know the script. That's not nothing. She looked down. I was supposed to study in Berlin. Before everything. You still can. She laughed under her breath. As Clara Linton, governess to a child I haven't met? There are libraries in Alexandria. And time. A gull screamed overhead, circling the mast before diving toward the waves. Why did you become a spy? She asked. His answer came slowly. Because I grew up in a house where silence was safer than truth. Was your father in the service? No. He was a tailor. But he refused to bribe the tax agents. We lost everything in a season. My sister starved before winter ended. She turned then, fully. I'm sorry. Ziven shook his head. I learned early that power listens only when you speak in its language. And now you speak it. Enough to translate. They moved along the deck as the sun warmed the horizon. The few other passengers avoided eye contact, clustered near the bow. A priest in travel-worn robes murmured to himself in Hungarian. A woman with a veil sat alone, hands folded tightly in her lap. Later that afternoon, when the wind turned sharp, Celandine joined Ziven below deck in a small room with 2 narrow benches and a chipped basin. He had laid out a map of Alexandria, hand-drawn in parts, with notations in German. This, he tapped, is where the consul's residence stands. The school is here, across the square. You'll be expected to walk the child home each day. What's her name? Evelyn Margaret Keating. Age 9. Her mother died last year. And the father? Still in London. The uncle is the consul. He requested a governess with discretion. Celandine traced the path between the buildings with her finger. What about you? I'll be working in the customs office near the dockyard. It's noisy, and the hours are long. But I'll be nearby. And you'll still be listening? He didn't answer that. That evening, after supper, she sat on the upper deck with a borrowed book, though her eyes didn't move across the page. Ziven joined her for a moment, resting against the rail. I haven't thanked you, she said. I didn't ask you to. You've risked a great deal. So have you. The sky darkened into a velvet dusk, stars blinking into view above the mast lines. She closed the book. There's something I should tell you. He waited. When I was 15, I stole my father's seal and signed a letter that ruined a man. I thought I was protecting him. I didn't understand the stakes. Ziven's expression didn't change. And now, I think I was protecting a lie. He exhaled slowly. We all carry something. The lanterns above them hissed as the wind shifted. I want to matter, she said quietly. Not for who I was born as, but for what I choose. Ziven looked at her then, and something softened in his posture. You already do. Neither of them looked away. That night, sleep came late. In her narrow berth, Celandine lay awake, listening to the creak and pitch of the hull. Outside, the sea rolled on, vast and unknowable. But in the dark, for the first time in many years, she did not feel alone. The port of Alexandria shimmered beneath the desert sun, its ochre buildings bleached pale against the sky. Crates thudded onto the quay as dockworkers shouted in Italian, Greek, and Arabic, the syllables rising and falling like gulls overhead. Celandine stepped down the gangway with her shawl drawn low against the glare, her satchel pressed to her side. The heat pressed against her skin with a weight unlike anything she'd known in Europe. Ziven was waiting at the base of the ramp, his collar open and coat slung over one shoulder. His clothes had already shifted lighter fabrics, worn boots dusted with sand. He looked as if he belonged, though his eyes never stopped moving. "You'll meet the consul's household after Vespers," he said without preamble. "They keep to Anglican time. You'll be expected to observe it." "I understand," she answered, adjusting the brim of her hat. They walked in tandem through the narrow streets. The scent of cumin and sun warmed fish thick in the air. Men in linen tunics lounged under awnings, and women passed with baskets balanced high on their heads. Celandine kept her eyes ahead, absorbing everything and revealing nothing. "There's a cafe you should avoid," Ziven said, nodding to a corner with faded blue shutters. "Too many European officers, too few reasons to trust their curiosity. You think they'll know who I am? They'll guess you're not from Sussex." She didn't smile. "Then I'll be careful." They reached a quiet lane beyond the bustle, where the consul's residence rose in whitewashed stone behind a wall of date palms. A boy in a loose tunic opened the gate, his hands stained with ink. Inside, the garden was shaded and still, the sound of water trickling from a lion-mouthed fountain. A maid showed her to a small room at the rear of the house. The furnishings were English oak, the linen starched. On the desk lay a worn copy of Pilgrim's Progress, its edges chewed with age. A single framed photograph sat on the mantel, an older man in naval uniform, standing beside a girl with dark braids and a solemn gaze. "Uncle says I'm not to speak with strangers," said a voice from the doorway. Celandine turned. The girl was small and thin, her gaze direct. Her dress was stiff with embroidery. A ribbon hung crooked in her hair. "I'm not a stranger," Celandine said. "I'm Clara Linton. You don't sound like Mother's people. I lived in Vienna." The girl frowned slightly, then walked in and sat on the edge of the bed. "I don't like Latin." "Neither did I." The girl looked up. "Will you make me read it?" "Yes, but I'll hate it with you." There was a long pause, then, "Good. I'm Evelyn." In the garden after supper, Celandine sat beneath a jacaranda tree while Evelyn recited lines from Virgil in a voice that barely rose above a whisper. The girl's accent was clipped and awkward, the cadence learned by mimicry. But she did not complain. Ziven appeared at the iron gate just before twilight, his posture loose but his gaze alert. He waited until Evelyn was called in by the housekeeper before approaching. "You weren't followed," he said. "I know. They're watching the French consulate. Someone's moving letters through the clergy." Celandine tilted her head. "That has nothing to do with me." "It might. You're still a thread, even if they've stopped tugging." She brushed a leaf from her skirt. "Then you should go." "I will. But not yet." He stepped inside the garden, his boots silent on the worn tiles. The jacaranda's petals had begun to fall, pale purple against the dusk. "I've been assigned a room near the customs warehouse," he said. 2 floors above a spice merchant. The walls are thin. "Do you sleep?" "When I have to." She looked at him then, truly looked. The exhaustion beneath his stillness. The steadiness that never faltered. "I don't know who I am here," she said quietly. "You're someone who chose her own road." "And you? What do you choose?" He hesitated, then sat on the low wall across from her. "I chose to follow you." She blinked. "You didn't have to." "I did." For a moment, neither spoke. The air had cooled slightly, and the sounds of the city had softened into a distant hum. A cat darted across the path, its tail flicking beneath the hibiscus. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you live. You teach Evelyn Latin. You walk to market. You forget the taste of fear. And when it returns, I'll still be here." She nodded slowly, her hands folded in her lap. "I'm not ready for anything more," she said. "I'm not asking." But he stayed seated, watching her with the same patience he had shown in Vienna. Not pressing, not retreating, simply present. When the house bell rang for evening devotions, she stood. "Will you come again?" she asked. "If you want me to." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. As she turned toward the door, he rose too. Not to follow, just to remain a little longer in the garden. The petals continued to fall.